Hello, I'm going to look at Chapter 8, Part B, which is 8.2, checking for validity, but only the first half of that. We're not doing this whole chapter, actually. I have a couple things at the end that we're not going to do for lots of reasons, and I'll get there eventually. So we did in 8.1, we talked about the connectives and truth values and all of that. In 8.2, we're going to use them to check for validity, okay, which is the whole point of the truth table, right? So one of the big things here, let's see, put this way up on top. Okay, it's impossible for a valid argument to have all true premises and a false conclusion. Okay, this is our overriding theme, okay, and this is on page 261. Okay, so it's impossible for a valid argument to have all true premises and a false conclusion. If it's possible for our argument to have all true premises and a false conclusion, then it's invalid. Okay, can't be valid, invalid. Kind of, that's one of those, have this running around the back of your head. Okay, simple arguments, okay, two variables and two variables only. And it's like our modus ponens and modus tollens and the disjunctive syllogism. Those three valid forms only have two variables, two letters, okay? So we know, and this is on the bottom of page 262, he gives us, here's what they look like, okay? Common argument forms symbolized. And so we have modus ponens is valid, modus tollens is valid, of course. The two in the middle are invalid. A hypothetical syllogism, it has three variables though, so we'll save that for the second part for our 8C stuff. And then a disjunctive syllogism only has two variables and it's valid. Okay? So we're going to get a little more complex, and that's okay. Just take a breath and do it the same way all the time, and you will get consistent results. Okay? So as far as how you're going to do this and what you're going to do, I want you to do it the same way all the time. Now, another thing I put up in I might just have it as a different link at the moment. Anyway, I have for you a few examples and then the grid that you might find useful for these kinds of truth tables so that everything is spaced and lined up correctly, even if your premise is a little more complex, you still have just the one thing, and I'll get there in a minute. Okay, so if my argument, if the icebergs melt, the lowlands will flood. The icebergs will not melt, therefore the lowlands will not flood. Okay, now we're going to use all of that over there. We're going to remember this, and we're going to do this thing. So the argument is okay, let me back up. When I'm doing an argument and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to do this? Sorry, I think I need to pick him up and not dump everything out of everything. Okay, that's better. So if my argument is here at the middle of 263, if the icebergs melt, the lowlands will flood. Okay, so my first phrase is my P. Okay, P is the icebergs melt. Okay, Q is my next phrase. The lowlands will flood. Okay, so then I usually go in and I I sketch in a P above every time I see the icebergs melt, okay? And I note if there's a knot, okay? And so I end up with this. If P, then Q. Not P, the icebergs don't melt, therefore not Q. Now, you can find the triple dots in your computer and save it and do all the things, or you can just write so. Okay. So this is the arguments truth table. Now we know, I'm going to try to stand over far enough so you can see this. We know that we need our two variables because we always start with our variables in their list. And then we look at what else is there, okay? So all of this in a simple argument, that's all we need, just our variables. And then we have our, each premise gets its own column. Put your conclusion at the end, which I know sounds reasonable, right? But sometimes you end up with a column that looks like another column. That's okay. Now we're just easy, okay? So we're going to use 4 rows. We're going to use the half and half rule so that this looks very familiar. Okay, so this looks like the beginning of every truth table we've done so far. True, true, false, false, true, false, true, false. Okay, now the good news is we already know this set. Okay, so if true, and sorry, I want to do this because this is what I call my guide, and this is the argument. Okay, you don't have to draw the line. I'm just illustrating for you so you can see it more easily. So I'm looking at my if then, and I'm going to use these guys. Okay, so if true, then true is true. If true, then false is false. If false, we don't have to think about anything else, it's true. If false, true. Okay, so it looks, that whole piece there looks just like our conditional. Okay, we have a little bit more work to do though. Not P. Okay, so for negation, we know it's opposite day. So I'm going to look at my guide here for P is true, true, false, false. So opposite would be false, false, true, true. And then my ending, my conclusion is not Q. So again, it's going to be opposite day here. False, true, false, true. Now, here comes, you have done all the work. Now here comes the is it valid? And what we do to check validity is to only look at the false conclusions and make sure they have at least one false premise. Okay? Because of that. So here's one, this one, and I'm only looking at the premises. That's another reason for this line here. These guys don't count in the argument. They just help us get there. Okay? So I have a false here, but I have a false there, so he's okay. And then I have another false conclusion, but both of his premises are true, so it's invalid. Okay, so let me run that one more time. When we get the whole thing finished, we're going to look only at the false conclusions because up here, okay, it's impossible for a valid argument to have all true premises and a false conclusion. And so if my argument manages to do that, it's invalid. And it only takes one. It's like a drop of poison. You don't drink the water, right? So that's how we do it every time. Hopefully that makes good sense. Now, there are some funny ones. From here to absurdity on 264 is also interesting. Prescient. So I'm going to walk through a couple more of these, kind of make some up so you can see the practice. And here's what I want you to do to practice. I'm going to do this couple other put it together kind of arguments. And I want you to think about how you would do it, okay? So I'm going to put an argument up, and then I'm going to tell you, okay, pause me, figure out your top line, and then come back, and I'll do the top line, and you can see how you did, and you can make corrections if you need to, and then we'll do the trues and falses. Does that make sense? I hope. I'm leaving those guys up over there, because what we're doing here is not that bad. So my first argument, I want to do something that has a couple different phrases in it. So I'm going to do if P, then Q, not Q, and P. Therefore, not P. This is like, ooh, okay, a little bit different. So we do it the same way every time. That's what I tell you. So I've got my my half and half rule, all that. So I have my variables, P and Q. And whenever you have, when you're looking to see about your guide portion, okay, you want to make sure that when you get to the premises, you only have one operation to do, okay, one symbol to deal with. Well, the second line here, the second premise has two. It has a negation and it has an and. Well, the easiest thing to pull out is always the not. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to do my if P, then Q, not Q, and P, therefore not P. Okay, so I've got both of my premises have their own column, and my conclusion has its own column, and I have my guide, and I'm ready. Well, ready as I'm going to get in this. Okay, so normal stuff, my half and half rule, true, true, false, false. And then half of that is one by one, true, false, true, false. Okay? So far, so good, right? I forgot to say pause me, but hopefully you did that. So it's right here. My not Q is opposite day. So false, true, false, true. Okay, now I have everything I need to go on and do the rest. If P, then Q. Okay, so I'm looking at just these first two columns and normal direction. So true, false, true, true. Okay. Well, then I'm going to do the and with my outside edges. So I want to look at this column and this column and put the answer over here. So remember, with a conjunction, the only one that's true is when they're both true. Okay, so I have true and false, so that's false. True and true, false and false, false and true. Okay, so far so good. Now, the not P goes back to here an opposite day. It's my double, so I'm going to go false, false, true, true. Okay, so I have my whole truth tables done. Now I just need to check its validity. And I'm going to look at the false conclusions only and make sure they each have at least one false premise. Okay, so I have this line has a false conclusion, but it's got a false premise there, so it's okay. This one is a false conclusion, but it has a false one over there, so it's okay. So this is actually a valid argument. Lo and behold, I don't usually, off the top of my head, make valid arguments. Just something to be said about other things. So, how'd you do? Not too horrible? Let's do one more, and then I'll leave you alone for this anyway. You can go do the homework. And remember, there is a homework video, and it has examples from each of these. I think for most of us, the hardest ones are the ones that we have to start with words. And so I'm kind of skipping that part, but we'll go back and have some fun with that later. Okay, last one. Now I want to do one of each. So let's do P or Q, if P then Q, not Q, so P and Q. This one's probably not good, not valid, but anyway, I'm going to work that out. I don't have to do any extra in my guide because each line only has one symbol. And so I'm going to go P, Q. This board has some interesting spots on it. My Q goes, ugh. Anyway, P or Q, if P then Q, not Q, so P and Q. Not too horrible. Okay? So again, true, true, false, false, true, false, true, false. Same way every time. That way you make sure you got them all. P or Q, everybody's true except when we have both false statements. If P then Q, everything is true except for that when the true is first and the false is second, false. And then those guys are true. Not Q, so we're going to flip that. False, true, false, true. And then P and Q, of course, is only true in this very first one. The rest are all false. So we have some work to do with our validity checking. Okay? So this one, I have a false conclusion, but I have one false premise, so he's okay. This one, false conclusion, but a false premise, so again. And false conclusion and false premise. So yay, hey, I wrote another valid argument. That's some sort of record, okay? So when you see these, don't get stressed out about, oh, there's 4 and I got to do everything. And okay, it starts out the same. You do one row at a time, one column at a time, and then when you get it all done, okay, check my false conclusions and make sure they each have a false premise. If they don't have a false premise, then it's invalid. Okay, so that's how it works all the time. Okay, if you have questions, let me know, because, you know, that's what I'm here for. So you have my email, make your little cheat sheets, make your grids, do all that, make sure that you're practicing this, that you're doing the homework, make a stab, and I'll explain some other things when we get to the test time. So, thanks.